In February of 1959, 9 experienced hikers stood at a snow-covered railway platform in the Soviet Union. They boarded a train that would take them toward the Ural Mountains. Decades later, these photographs remain the only trace of their journey. They traveled deeper into winter terrain, far beyond populated regions. The expedition was led by Igor Dyatlov, an experienced student mountaineer. Every member of the group was trained for harsh Arctic survival conditions. At first, the landscape showed no sign of danger or instability. Their movement across the snowfields remained steady and coordinated. They paused briefly to rest in open tundra, with no shelter nearby. There was still no indication that anything was wrong. Inside remote shelters, they studied maps and planned their next route. Then they continued deeper into the mountain wilderness. As they moved forward, the terrain began to shift into denser forest edges. Sudden weather changes reduced visibility across the entire region. Despite worsening conditions, the group maintained formation. They adjusted equipment constantly to survive the growing cold. The landscape began to close in, narrowing their path forward. Navigation became more difficult under shifting wind and snow. Still, there was no panic within the group. Only persistence carried them through the harsh terrain. Distance from any form of safety continued to increase. The group stayed tightly coordinated as conditions worsened. Weather instability began to dominate the entire environment. Yet they pressed forward into increasingly uncertain territory. Late in the day, they began searching for a place to establish camp. The storm intensified faster than expected. Visibility dropped as dusk began to settle over the mountains. Despite this, they refused to turn back. A decision was made to move toward higher exposed ground. That decision would later become heavily questioned. They began preparing their final campsite on an open slope. There were no natural barriers or protective terrain nearby. Yet they continued setting up camp in the exposed location. Wind conditions made the environment increasingly unstable. Still, the group committed to staying there for the night. It would become their final recorded location. Night fell quickly over the frozen mountain range. Temperatures dropped sharply after sunset. Inside the tent, the group gathered together for warmth. Outside, wind pressure against the tent continued to increase. Then something changed within the camp that night. Evidence later suggested an abrupt evacuation began, but the exact cause was never confirmed. Critical equipment was left behind inside the tent. Footprints began leading away from the campsite. The trail moved downward toward the forest below. The abandoned camp remained exposed to the storm. By morning, the entire group had vanished. Search teams arrived days later to begin recovery operations. The first signs of the campsite were quickly discovered. Investigators immediately noted signs of abnormal disturbance. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Footprints led away from the damaged campsite. The trail descended into a dense forested area. Under a large cedar tree, the first bodies were discovered. Evidence suggested attempts at survival in extreme conditions. More bodies were later found between forest and slope. Their positions indicated attempted movement back toward camp. Official reports described an unknown compelling force. Even today, the incident remains officially unresolved.